Well, good morning. What a great honor it is to be up here on this stage at the Legatus Summit. Legatus has been such a great gift to our church, and in particular to the ministry of Catholic Leadership Institute. Local chapters have been some of the best ambassadors for bringing our leadership training to bishops and priests around the country. I want to say a special word of thanks just because I'm up here to Tom Monahan. Tom, we at CLI spend a lot of time trying to help leaders realize their vision. And I hope as you look out on these sold-out crowds year over year, the truth, beauty, and goodness of your vision fulfilled isn't ever lost on you. So let's give him our thanks. Can we give Tom our thanks? So I need to kind of come right out and be honest with you, clean slate from the beginning as to how this talk came to be, and particularly the title of my talk. You see, I got a call in April from a wonderful person at Legatus who will remain nameless. And she said to me that they had heard great things about some of my chapter talks and the great work of Catholic Leadership Institute, but there was a but. She said that I was not one of their typical main stage speakers. And I asked for a little bit more context, and she said, well, typically, a main stage speaker has published at least one book, probably several. I have no books. Typically, they've appeared on EWTN several times or major television programs. I love EWTN. I have never appeared on it. And former main stage speakers have even included the President of the United States, also clearly not me. Finally, after kind of dancing around it for a little bit, she finally just came out and said, Dan, you're not Scott Hahn, which I fully conceded, and I nonetheless came home very excited to my wife, Tricia, who's here with us today. Hello, dear, wherever you are, there you are. And I told Tricia that I had been invited to be a main stage speaker, and in her typical loving way, she said, wow, why'd they pick you? She said, it's not like you're Scott Hahn. So, my friends, lest there be any confusion, I am not Scott Hahn, okay? Nor am I Ryan Anderson, although that one's a little closer, actually. Show of hands, how many were at the summit last year? What a great event, right, in Orlando? And Scott and Ryan both spoke there. And I happened to be there the day that they were speaking, and when Ryan was speaking, we were actually both wearing the same color suit, this color. And I cannot tell you how many compliments I got on my presentation about the transgender issues facing our country today. In fact, it got so awkward by the end of the day that I may or may not have even signed some of his books just to save everybody the embarrassment. So I apologize for that. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I am Dan Cellucci. Let's see if this moves us for it. There we go. As Father said, my proudest vocation is as husband and father to 4 little ones. In my big Italian family, I am the Catholic one. I don't know if that mantle rings true for anybody else in the audience, but among my cousins and my siblings, that is how I am known. And I have been blessed to serve the ministry of Catholic Leadership Institute for most of my adult life. And particularly because I am not Scott Hahn, I agreed with my friend at Legatus back in April that I would need a pretty catchy and provocative title. So like a fool, in April, I suggested, what about the truth of where we are as a church? Well, that title takes on a little bit more meaning after the last 6 months we've had, huh? So what I'd like to do in our time today, is give you some truths about the landscape of our church. Now, all these truths were present before the summer of 2018, but I think they have particular implications and connections to where we find ourselves today. I'd also like to share with you some suggestions for what each of us can do to help move our church forward, each one of us. Okay? By way of sources for my talk today, 2 primary ones. First is one of the largest leadership research projects in the Catholic Church today, CLI's Disciple Maker Index. We have surveyed over 100,000 parishioners in 400 parishes over 22 dioceses. We've asked them everything from their beliefs and practices of the faith to what they think of their pastor's homilies. Now, it's important for me to note, these are the people who are in Mass weekly. Okay, I'm not even talking to the people, the 60 or 70% who no longer practice. So keep that in mind because it's important as I go through this presentation. We'll also be drawing on our 25 years plus of serving the church at a number of different levels. 100 different dioceses, bishops, over 20% of diocesan priests in this country, I'll be weaving in some of my experiences from that as well. What I want to do is give you the 5 biggest truths of where we are. Now, my friends, this is not the exhaustive list of truths of where we are, but they are truths for which I have a lot of evidence, and I think bear the most actionable opportunities for us as lay people. As you can tell from my friend there on the screen, they don't paint the rosiest pictures. So I'll ask you, are you ready for the truth? All right, let's hear it. Truth number 5. We are in a sacramental freefall and approaching a seismic generational shift in this country. Now, this one you may know intuitively, you may just not have a sense of the scope or severity. Since 1990, Catholic marriages are down 55%. Now, that's obviously an indicator for baptisms, but even if we look after baptism, we see that 1 in 5 children who is baptized will never see their first Holy Communion. 2 in 5 baptized will never make it to confirmation. And for those confirmed, 85% will stop the practice of their faith by age 21. Now, many people ask me, Dan, they'll come back when they get married and settle down. That's what happens. Well, look at our first bullet point there. That first step isn't happening. So we can't count on that anymore. Even if we look at the practice of the faith, and again, remember, this is who is going to Mass weekly, half no longer believe in the teaching authority of the church, a third never go to confession, and only 3/4 still believe in the true presence in the Eucharist. And I say only because these are the folks who are coming to Mass every week. Even more daunting is this next prediction or projection that I think we're least prepared for. We're entering into this seismic generational shift in our country. Many in the room here might be baby boomers. You got your name precisely because of the size of your generational cohort, right? Largest living generation, that's about 22 million Catholic baby boomers today, with 60% of you practicing your faith, okay? Now, I haven't figured out a more delicate way to say this, but you will die sooner than the next cohort. That's Generation X, and that's just a smaller number of people total. 16 million Catholic Gen Xers, but only 30% of them are practicing their faith. Now, we know in our parishes today that 5 to 7% of us are doing most of the heavy lifting, most of the giving, most of the volunteering, and that's mostly baby boomers. So if you do the calculations, as we enter into this shift that's going to happen, you don't need to do the math, we've done it for you. We can estimate that we're going to start losing about 8 million people a year and about $5 billion a year to the U.S. Catholic Church. Have I depressed you sufficiently yet? Okay, well, we got 4 more truths, so get excited, all right? The silver lining here is that my generation, the millennial generation, is actually now the largest living generation. The problem is only 30% of us are practicing our faith, so there's great opportunity there. All right, truth number 4. Our parishes are facing an identity crisis. Most of our institutions, but particularly our parishes and schools, are built off a set of assumptions that are no longer true. Principally, that the domestic church is strong. And by and large, as we just saw in our last truth, I don't think that's a fair assessment anymore. So we have our parishes trying to fill a void that they were never designed to fill and can never fill, the family, okay? On the one hand, we have mandatory 1-hour parish-based religious education every week, okay? That's never going to be able to replace what 2 parents do in the home day after day with their children. Not even our Catholic schools were designed in their current format to fill that void. So what emerges are these unmet and unrealistic expectations. On the one hand, we have our parish leaders who are frustrated. On the other hand, parents, many of whom now are growing up in a culturally Catholic household, really do believe in their heart of hearts that making that tuition payment or driving their child to parish education is doing their job. Now, a criticism of the church often is that sometimes we act too businesslike, too corporate. Well, I think in this area, maybe we haven't acted businesslike enough. If your business wasn't producing results after 25 years, you'd probably be out of business. Or you'd probably change some strategies to get you to a different result. And I think we need some different strategies as it relates to passing on our faith to the children. So we take this shaky domestic church, poor formational foundation, we take unrealistic expectations, we throw in one of the most egregious scandals, and this next truth, and we have a recipe for disaster. Truth number 3, we are dependent on men and not the man. The majority of our Mass-going Catholics right now, their practice of the faith is highly correlated to their pastor. Now, look, as the CEO of an organization called Catholic Leadership Institute, I am the first to say that leaders matter. But what our research has shown is that there's really this disproportionate and unhealthy dependency on our priests for a faith that calls us all to be dependent on the Lord. A parishioner today is 11 times more likely to recommend their parish to a friend if they're likely to recommend their pastor to a friend. 11 times. That dwarfs everything else. Even more frightening, perhaps, is that they are 4 times more likely to say that the parish is helping them grow spiritually overall as a Catholic if they like their pastor. No pressure, fathers. Okay? Even if we look at our current crisis, Mass counts, offertory collections, they fluctuate pastor to pastor. Yes, in the aggregate, they may be down, but not everywhere because of this correlation. So I'd like to share with you just a little bit of what we've gotten to know about these men, our priests and our bishops, over the last 25 years plus of serving them. As I said, we have been blessed to serve almost 20% of the diocesan priests in this country. And we try to do a lot for them, try to teach them how to lead teams, how to strategically plan, how to recruit volunteers. But one of the most important things we do and spend the most time is try to give them self-awareness. Try to fill in a void that was missing in their seminary formation. One of the principal ways we do that is through an instrument called the DISC profile. You may have heard of it before. It's commonly used in a lot of organizations. The DISC profile looks at our instinctive, observable behaviors under stress. Okay? And the general populace falls in evenly to about 4 buckets. I think when I show you the skew among our priests, that might give you some food for thought for our current situation. So again, we all kind of fall into one of these 4 buckets, more or less. There are those of us who are outcome-oriented, okay? Change-ready, conflict-ready, take no prisoners, feast day of St. Paul. St. Paul would be a good example, okay? That's 8% of our priests and bishops. There are those of us who are the life of the party, very relational, like to socialize, okay? Open to change, but deathly afraid of offending anybody. That's 26% of our priests. There are those of us who are service-oriented, hate the spotlight, just want to be behind the scenes, good soldiers, great at following orders. That's almost half of our priests and bishops. And then there are those who are engineers and lawyers, the detail-oriented folks who can create a plan and follow it to the T. That's about 21% of our priests and bishops. But if we look, again, almost half, under stress, are very change-averse and very conflict-avoidant. 3/4, really, if you look at it together, have some degree of change aversion and conflict aversion. Now, again, this doesn't explain the whole of our current crisis, but I do think it's something worth considering. We have to acknowledge that among our priests and bishops, there have been those who have been dishonest, corrupt, and morally unfit. But in my 14 years of serving these men very closely, as a body, I do not see them as the conspiratorial mobsters that popular imagination would have us believe. I do see, however, that in the face of great conflict and stress, they can quickly become overwhelmed and paralyzed and make the wrong decisions. Which factors into truth number 2. Excuse my academic language here. We have too much stuff and we can't take care of it. Okay? One of the things that I see happening in our church right now, driving decisions, is a fear of losing things, losing our stuff. Okay? I see it on all different levels. Certainly I see it at large levels in the Northeast with parish consolidation, but all over the country. Okay? Yes, our bishops and our priests are very change averse, but we as laity are very resistant to give things up, whether it be our Mass times or our pet ministry projects. we try to hold on to a lot. Now, I don't know about you, but there's lots of calls for change, but sometimes we don't want it in our backyard. Sometimes we want the rights of our parish, but not the responsibilities. It strikes me that the early church had one big advantage over us. They had nothing to lose but their lives. And if we look at great companies and great organizations, they are oftentimes founded by people who come from nothing and aren't afraid to lose everything. You know, the more that we hold on to things out of fear of loss rather than purpose of mission, we can expect that stress levels are going to go up, debt, deferred maintenance are going to expand, yes, but worst of all, we're going to be consumed in conversations about the temporal. Satan, the great distractor, as I like to call him, will engulf us in self-detailed arguments about the truth of where we are, as opposed to the much more important conversation about the truth of who we are. And that brings me to my number one most important truth of this presentation. I messed up the title of this talk. I messed up the title of this talk, my friends, because the truth of where we are is never as important as the truth of who we are. We are facing a crisis of authenticity. We are facing a crisis of fidelity to our vows, to our baptismal promise. This crisis didn't start with McCarrick. He's just the most egregious symptom of it. And it won't end with some USCCB action or even a worldwide conference next month, although I pray fervently for both. It will get better when each and every one of us reclaim and remember the truth of who we are called to be. And so that's what I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking about with you. Because you know what? It's a much better story, and I think you might have heard it before. The truth of who we are is that we are one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Now you might be saying, Dan, I thought you were going to give us something new and interesting. Well, you know what, my friends? There's a lot of power in these words that we say pretty frequently. And sometimes the next shiny thing is just another distraction. Sometimes we don't need a new lens, we just need to wipe off the old one. And I think each one of these words has particular importance for us in the here and the now. We are one. Scripture passage there from John. One of the things that concerns me most about where we are today is the fracturing that is growing in scope and severity among us as a church. Now, Scripture tells us that there will be separation, there will be reckoning, there will be final judgment. It's just not ours to do. We may become a remnant church, but we shouldn't take pride in that. It shouldn't be our goal. As it says in John, we've been consecrated to bring people to the truth, to bring them to oneness in Christ. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying we should just go along to get along. The truth is our destination. But in that journey, are we consciously trying to pull people in? You know, the parishes that we get to work with that are focused on the future, ready for the future, they have clarity of purpose of mission to bring people home. Separation, division, schism, that's easy. That's the path of least resistance. Pursuit of virtue, staying in the difficult conversation, asking the good questions, demonstrating restraint, that's the harder way. And we're a people who know that anything good doesn't come easy. And that's because we're holy. That's because we're set apart. How would you feel if you walked in and saw your priest drinking his morning coffee out of his chalice? You'd be rightly scandalized. Why? It's not just a cup. It's a vessel, a sacred vessel that's been consecrated for God's use and God's use alone. My friends, so are we. We have been consecrated for God's use and God's use alone. Do we see each other that way? Do we treat each other that way? Do we see ourselves that way? You know, the parishes that we get to work with that, again, are ready for the future are ones that, yes, recognize that people in the pews are at different places, but see each and every one of them as chalices to hold the living God. People to extend an invitation to put their lives at the service of the Lord and the Lord alone. Let us not further the desecration that's taken place in our church by evil in the way that we treat each other. And in our understandable anxiety about the present situation, let us also remember that as a people set apart, God has so much more in store for us. You know, when we think about Pearl Harbor, we think about it as this horrific American defeat. But interestingly, if you read Japanese history, they describe it as the beginning of their defeat in World War II. Why? They had two objectives for that mission: annihilate U.S. naval capacity in the Pacific and keep the U.S. out of World War II. They failed on both accounts. So my friends, sometimes what looks like defeat is actually the beginning of victory. You know, if we're telling truths, I need to tell you, the last 6 months have been pretty difficult for me. I have spent my whole adult life not only serving the church, but specifically our bishops and our priests in their leadership. I felt embarrassed. I felt foolish. I felt like, as the Catholic one, my siblings and my cousins looked at my life as just plain silly. I felt humiliated. And in my prayer, gratefully, God reminded me this was probably pretty humiliating. And in my pride and my anger, I was missing an awesome opportunity that comes with humiliation to draw closer to him. Are we drawing closer to him in this time? We are Catholic. Now, no, that doesn't mean you have to be an Eagles fan, but in my hometown of Philadelphia, some people do believe it is the only path to salvation. No, we are Catholic. We are universal, universally relevant today. Let me say it twice. There has never been a better time to evangelize. There has never been a better time to evangelize. But we need to wear our jerseys. On game day in Philadelphia, you can not go into a grocery store or regrettably even Sunday Mass and not see Eagles jerseys everywhere, okay? Now that was certainly true during the Super Bowl drive, but even in the worst seasons, you can spot an Eagles fan a mile away. Will people spot us a mile away in this terrible season? Will we let them see us? We are working with parishes today that are bringing 30 and 40 adults into the faith every year. Every year. Are we wearing our jerseys? You know, Trish and I have been in our neighborhood for about 2 years, and we share a cul-de-sac with a family that we become kind of friendly with. And the kids play together outside, and we chat outside all the time. They're both inactive Catholics, not angry, just ambivalent. And but the husband is fascinated by my job. He can't believe that my job is actually a job. So he asks me lots of questions. And I've been trying to be restrained and kind of seizing on his interest. But one day this fall, he asked me a bunch of questions, and I replied, "I'm just curious why you don't go anymore." And he didn't really have an answer. He kind of fleetingly mentioned the scandals, said he believes in science, but he didn't really know. He said it just kind of wasn't a priority. So a couple weeks later, I was outside with his wife, and she said, "Hey, would it be all right if we came to Mass with you sometime and your family?" And in my shock that anybody would come back to the church this fall, I said, "Why?" Way to go, Dan, right? Way to seize it. But she said, you know what? I don't know. She said, "We enjoy you guys." She said, "You're cool, and it's real to you." And it's real to you. Shame on me for putting limits on God's power, God's light in this darkness. Our light will be the brightest in this darkness. Do we have our jerseys on? Will other people look at us and say, it's real to us? Now may not be the best of times, and it may not be the worst of times, but it's undeniably our time. What will we do with it? We are apostolic. This one might be difficult for some of us right now. But we thank God for his decision to pass down the most perfect and divine truth through the most imperfect vessels, us, and specifically in the line of Peter, our bishops and our priests. You know, the parishes that we see that are bucking all the trends are the ones where clergy and laity embrace their spousal partnership, their beautiful complementarity. Calls to compartmentalize these men as merely sacramental ministers or to remove governance from their lives are short-sighted, fall short. Okay, laity can, and should have important roles in governance, but if we think we're just going to replace collars for suits to fix the problem, we're wrong. I don't know if you noticed, but there's some pretty interesting lay people out there, okay? No, we can claim our baptismal call to leadership without forsaking theirs. We can find and support the best of them without becoming like the worst of them. A bishop told me that as a young priest, his first assignment was to a predominantly Latino community. His Spanish was decent, but it wasn't great and wasn't fluent by any means. And after every daily mass, this old grandmother would come up and kiss his hand, and it made him so uncomfortable. But he couldn't say anything because he didn't know how to explain it to her. After a year, his Spanish got pretty good, and so one day he said to her, "You don't have to do that. I'm not that special." And she looked at him knowingly and said, "Son, I don't kiss your hand to tell you that you're special. I kiss your anointed hand to remind you of who you represent." We can love our priests and bishops in a way that reminds them of the truth of who they are. So my friends, if this is who we are, then where do we go from here? What do we do? I want to suggest 5 seemingly simple, but I think difficult and really important things that each one of us can do today. Okay? I think they're really important. Number 1, say I believe. Now is the most important time for us to be giving witness to our faith. We don't need to exhort people to pray. We need to pray in their presence. We don't need to tell people that they need to have faith. We need to tell them how faith has blessed us. This, from our research, is one of the hardest things for us to do. But I will tell you, I am here because of my grandmother. She constantly spoke of this person, Jesus, in her life all the time. To quote my neighbor, she was cool and it was real to her. Who will you be real to? Number 2, speak truth with love. Our priests can go their entire ministry without getting any feedback, good or bad. Not only that, even among our lay professionals at the parish or the diocese, there are very few examples, if any, of effective performance management. We all need feedback. Many of us might be blessed to have a spouse that holds up a mirror from time to time, or if you're like me, your children humble you every day. Our priests and bishops don't have that. At CLI, we're embarking on an ambitious endeavor to find 12 dioceses who are brave enough to revolutionize the way they do priest performance management, and we're going to give our priests the feedback and the support that they deserve, because we all need it. But you can play a part too. As laity, we can't just have 2 speeds for our feedback, none and angry letters. Okay? We need to work, as do our priests and bishops, to develop authentic relationships of trust where we tell each other the good and the bad. And if you feel like it's falling on deaf ears, do not give up. Keep offering it. You have no idea about the seeds that you're planting for the future. Succession planning. You know how important this is in your business. I don't need to tell you about it. But it's even more vitally important in the church today. We need your Catholic mentorship, especially you, Legatus members. Okay, we have one supporter who, anytime he agrees to chair a board, he further commits to find 3 replacement candidates and mentor those candidates for 3 years. What a gift. As a proud millennial, I own a lot of the attributes of my generation, but I will tell you, we need you. We need you to invite us into the life of the church. There's a great read out there for you from the 1950s called The Master Plan of Evangelism by Dr. Robert Coleman. Bottom line is that in all of Scripture, yes, Christ talks to some crowds, but really the bulk of Scripture is him talking to 12 guys and really just 3. He spent 3 years of his public ministry pouring into 3 guys, and look what that did. Can you identify in your sphere of influence 3 people who you can call by name, who you can invite into the life of the church, who you can mentor and pour into? You have no idea the dividends that'll pay for our church. We're working with 50 parishes around this country to turn around those awful trends that we saw earlier, but also to recruit the next generation of Catholic leaders for this country. We are out there. We need you to come and get us. You have a vital role to play in this. Number 4, support courageous leaders. No doubt, we need some change in our church. But as I said earlier, change comes with implications. It's going to require sacrifice. It might require humiliation. There might be some missteps and false starts along the way. This may be preaching to the choir, but don't stand on the sidelines and shout at the wind. No, be a voice of depth. Be a voice of reason. Give that feedback, ask those good questions. Don't feed into mistruths about ill-formed laity or power-hungry laity looking to take over the church. That's not who we are. And when you see bishops or priests or lay leaders who are trying to stand up for the truth, who are trying to offer authentic renewal in our church, stand with them. Offer them your support. We are redoubling our efforts at Catholic Leadership Institute to find those bishops and priests who want to set a new standard of leadership in the country, because that's what we do as a church. We set the standard. And we're going to give them everything we have. Will you? Lastly, thank you. You can clap. That's okay. Appreciate that. Lastly, and most importantly, stay close to the Lord. One of the mistruths that's unfortunately picking up speed is we don't need the church to have a relationship with the Lord. My friends, that's just not Catholic. We're called to encounter the Lord in the Word, in the sacrament, and yes, in the church's ministers and in each other. We need all of those dimensions to grow in our relationship with the Lord. You know, just in closing, I have always loved Legatus and your tagline, Ambassadors for Christ in the Marketplace, principally because as a child, I wanted to be the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican or to Italy. Interestingly enough, as I was studying for the Foreign Service in college, I noticed that having some cousins in Rome and speaking some Italian isn't even on the criteria list for those jobs, which was shocking to me. So that didn't really work out, but I do get to go to Rome fairly frequently, and I get to work with former Vatican ambassador Jim Nicholson. And I've gotten to be in the U.S. Embassy there on the Via Veneto a couple times. Every ambassador needs an embassy, right? We need a home base. We need somewhere where we feel safe, protected, where people speak our language. And as ambassadors for Christ in the Marketplace, we find ourselves in a beautiful embassy here at this summit. But Jim would be the first to tell you that the mark of any good ambassador is not how much time you spend in the embassy. The mark of a good ambassador is how much time you put yourself out in the landscape. My friends, the truth of who you are lies not in how many of these summits you attend, but what you do when you leave. And so I am very grateful to you for allowing me to spend some time with you in this beautiful embassy. I've put my email address up there in case you want to continue the conversation. And in the event that you really didn't like this presentation, just remember that my name is Ben Shapiro, and I'll be here all week. Thank you, and God bless.